All right, everyone. It is 6:11 p.m. Central Time, Thursday, August 31st. This is session 9, so this is the last night of class. So I'm wearing my celebratory t-shirt here. It says writing code so my cat can have a better life. So that's why we write code and we're frustrated all day long so we can buy lots of treats for our pets. We're going to do 3 or 4 challenges tonight. There are no slides to work on. So we're going to start off with the back of the line. This is going to be arrays and loops. And as you can see, pretty much all of the challenges here are finishing up with arrays and loops or objects and loops. So these are the most challenging challenges. As I said, they get more difficult as we get towards the bottom of the list. Obviously, there's the recursion ones here. I think we'll probably try for back of the line, repeated characters, or the number of characters might be a good one. And then we'll finish off with employee data, just depending on how time works out. And so with these, I will probably give longer time frames to complete these, like somewhere like in the 30 to 40 minute range. So I do ask that if you solve it, that you stay on top of notifying me so that we can keep moving and try and fit in as much as possible on the last night. Again, any of these that we skipped over, and a lot of these ones that we skipped over in the beginning is just because they're repetitive. So like a lot of these types ones, like rectangle 1 and rectangle 2 are almost the same thing. One is like adding 4 sides together and the other is multiplying the like 2 sides by 2 each and then adding them together. So either way, you're just finding out something about a rectangle. Towards the end here, like if there's any of these that we skipped over, you're always welcome to go back and visit these on your own time. If you have questions, you can absolutely ask in the intro to Slack, or you can message me directly. And the same will go for once you move past this, if you're doing freecodecamp.org, or if you're pulling things off of LeetCode or Code Wars or whatever, and you get stumped on a challenge, you can throw things out into the main channel. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to. I'm always happy to try and help someone solve an algorithm challenge. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the first challenge tonight. We're going to do back of the line. Now, let me go ahead and drop this into our chat. And let's go ahead and fork it. These. I also need this. All right, so we're going to write a function that takes in 2 arguments, an array of names and a number, either negative or positive. The number represents how many positions the names in the array should move. The expected output is the array of names with the names in their new positions. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. We know that we have 2 inputs, 2 parameters, right? So we're going to have a number, which is how many names need to be moved. And we're going to have a array. All right, we're going to return one thing, which is the array. All right, so let's talk about some pseudocode here. First off, how do I take something off the end of an array? What built-in method do I use?
Pop?
Yep, pop. So pop removes the last element from an array. And how do I add an element to the end of an array? Yep, push. And if I want to take an element off the end of an array, or I'm sorry, off the beginning of an array,
Is it unshift? I can't remember.
shift takes it off, unshift adds the one on.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
all right. So you are going to need all four of these built-ins to solve this problem, right? And so first off, we need to determine if our number param is positive or negative, right? So right, and then once we have that, all right. So I will give you a heads up here, and let me, hopefully I can grab this whole thing. It might tell me it's too large. And it is. So I'm going to drop this in the intro to coding. So you guys can retrieve that from in here. Right, so you can go in there, right click on it, and there should be a copy this code block. So if you right click somewhere on the text, it'll say copy this code block. Copy the whole thing. You can drop that into your index.js in your REPL, and you'll have all of this. And so what we're going to do is basically we're going to be taking names either off the front or the back and then adding them in the opposite spot. And that is going to be determined on whether or not we're given a positive or negative number. Now, remember, when we pop and push things, that mutates the array, right? So if you run this one and then immediately run this one, you're going to move the array two names in a specific direction and then back one name in the other direction. So it won't match up with this. So comment one of these out and run it and get the first one to pass, and then you can comment that one out and uncomment the other one, then come back, because if you try and run them both at the same time, it won't line up. All right, because you're making permanent changes to the array. The other way that you could work around that is if you make two copies of the array, so they have like array of names 1, array of names 2, and then feed in array of names 1 to the first function call and array of names 2 into the second function call, then you can leave them both uncommented. But just know if when you run this, you're making a permanent mutation to this array up here. And so if you run this 20 times to the same array, you're going to keep bouncing the same array back and forth, and it'll throw off what we wrote in the comments there for you. All right, so we've got, so looks like 7 people. So we can do a group of 4 and a group of 3, and then we can shake up the teams and do it the other way. And Again, I know people have to come and go depending on what they've got going on, or if anyone else shows up, I'll add them to the teams to try and even them out. But outside of that, does anyone have any questions for me before I pause the recording and send everyone out into the breakout rooms? All right, let me pause the recording. All right, everyone, welcome back from the back of the line challenge. So as I had stated, we're going to be working in VS Code tonight when we solve the challenges. Past that, I've also gone ahead and used NPM, which is Node Package Manager, to start a Node project. What that's going to allow me to do is install Jest, which is a JavaScript testing framework. All right, and I'm going to use that to write some tests tonight as we move through this. And so that way we'll kind of see what it looks like. So there is something, and I will drop links to everything that I'm doing in here, basically like the Jest website and the getting started and all of those things. And so you can mimic it. And then the actual challenge itself, I will make sure to copy and paste back into the repo itself. So what we're looking at here, and I'm just going to pull this over real quick. So this is the getting started for Jest. And what you do is you write a file, or you create a file for your JavaScript, and then you need to export your function or any functions that you have that you've written in the file. And then you also create a basically a test.js file, and then you require it over there. And then you can use the Jest test runner to go ahead and execute tests. And this is what a real test would look like. So we're using a testing framework versus just like doing some strict equality or putting some notes at the bottom of a replit. This can be set up in Replit, but it's pretty cumbersome and it slows everything down. So that's why we do everything with the like just doing the strict equality at the bottom. All right, but so for me, what I'm going to do is let's talk through this challenge here a little bit. All right, so if I have the array of names Kyle, Stacy, Tina, Kenesha, and Greg, right, and if I get a +2, I end up with Kenesha, Greg, Kyle, Stacy, and Tina. All right, so if I give it a positive number, and that's what I'm going to solve for first here, I would expect that I would see basically Greg gets popped off the end and then put back on the front with an unshift function. And then that would be one iteration of the loop. And then the second time through, we would then grab Kenesha, pop her off the end, and then use unshift to place her back in the front, which would give us something that looks like this. All right, and now I don't expect anyone that's still like at the introductory level to write what's called TDD, or test-driven development, but I'm going to take a quick stab at it here, right? And so I'm going to write my test, and we'll say if given a positive number, it removes names from the end and adds to the front of array. All right, and this, and that's kind of a long test name, but that's kind of where we're at with this thing right now. All right, and so there is my test, and let's make sure that everything's good. What are you upset about? Oh, because I don't have a comma there. Now we're happy. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this right here, and I'm going to say let array of names equal this. And then what I'm going to say is I would expect oops, that back of the line, and then array of names would be 2 equal. I think it's 2 equal. Let's see here. Let's pull over matchers. So the matchers, if I'm doing strings or numbers, it would be 2b. But if I want to check an object or an array recursively, I need to use 2 equal. All right, so 2 equal. Right, and we'll say, let's just grab this here. Or, well, actually, we'll do this to keep it nice and clean. We'll say that, and we'll say let modified r equal this, and we'll call this original we'll say expected array, and we're going to take Kenesha, Greg, and we're going to move them up here. Right, and so now if I do something that looks like this, so I expect that if I run this function, it will equal this, the output of that function will equal this. All right, and so I'm just going over here real quick. This. All right, and so if I say yarn test in here, right, I failed, and so if given a positive number removes this, R of names is not defined. Okay, so there's my first error, because I did R of names and it should be original R. So I run my test again, I'm still failing. Okay, and so I got this and I received undefined, and that is because in my function over here, I don't have any return, so nothing is happening over here. Right, so if I do something like this and I just return R of names, and so now I'm not even running this anymore. And so like when we talked about this in the very beginning, right, so I'll just comment these out for now. Remember where I said, like, once you start writing software, you won't use console.log that often, right? Like you may use it to troubleshoot, but you won't use it. Sorry, and I'll make this a little bigger for everyone. You won't use it to write normal software. All right, and so now I'm not using console.logs anymore. I'm running my tests to see what's happening, and I'm reading my error messages. All right, and so I expected to get Kenesha, Greg, Kyle, Stacy, Tina, and that was, so this is telling me this is what I expected, but this is what I got, right? So because nothing happened. Now, an even more basic test than this would be, right? So if I take this and say, if given 0, nothing changes, right? And so now I don't need this to be any different. All right, so I can get rid of this, we'll say this, and if we run it, now I'll have one test passing and one test fails. All right, so one failed, one passed. Now, with my failing test here, I have to figure out how I'm going to solve my problem. All right, and so let's go ahead and start working through this. And so I know that I have an array of names coming in. If I get a positive number, I need to pop things off, and I'm only solving for the positive right now. So I can say for let I equal 0, I less than num of positions, I plus plus. Right, and then I can say for each time through, so I can say let last name equal our names dot pop. Right, and let's just go ahead, we'll run a console.log here, and we'll say last name. And we'll run the test. We'll still get a failing test, but I should also get my console.log statement. Actually, I probably won't in here. I do when I'm in replit. So I think if I do yarn test, no, how about yarn test? Yarn test scramble. I have no idea what that'll be. Let's see. Let's see. Console.log. Run yarn test. All right, so npm run test silent false. So let's go ahead and try that. And get it. No, we didn't get the console.log. So what I would probably do at this point is just come over here and run it over here. And let's say node. So we don't have like we do have a run button in VS Code, but I never use it. So I would actually just tell it node back of the line.js, and it'll run it. And so I get each time that I loop through, I get Greg and then I get Kenesha. Okay. And so let's go ahead and comment this back out again. I know that I'm getting my last name here. So now that I have it, what I can do is come back into my R of names and say dot unshift last name. I think unshift is all one word, last name. All right, so let's go ahead and run yarn test. Failed. And let's see here. That means so I've got expected and I've still got that there. So in this, let's see here, I may have something set up wrong with my test. Do this and console.log it. I get Kenesha, Greg, Kyle, Stacy, Kina, which is what I'm looking for. And let me save this, save this. This. Let's see what happens when we run this again. So still not getting anything. So we're saying 2 equal expected R. Why are given a positive number received 2 equal deep equality. I returning R names. Setting up just outside of a React application. All right, acquire backline, acquire. All right, I'm not sure why it's still giving me that. Just comment this out, make sure my tests aren't stepping on each other. Nope, still failed. Okay, so let expected R for this. I'm not sure why it's not modifying anything over here on this side. But I will continue to solve the problem. And then when I turn you guys to your next challenge, I'll figure out what I'm doing wrong with my test over here. All right. So either way, I have solved this first part, right? But now if I come over here and I do something like this, where I run this one, console.log, right? I end up with Kyle, Stacy, Tina, Kenesha, and Greg, right? So this isn't where I want to be. Because so as soon as I come in here with I being at 0, it's already greater than -1, which is what we get for num positions. And so we don't do anything. So now we need to figure out what to do when we have a negative number, right? And so for that, the first thing that pops into my mind is I need a conditional operator, right? So I can say if num positions is greater than or equal to, sorry, greater than or equal to 0, do this for me. Right, and then else we're going to do the opposite, right? So if we're less than 0, so if we get that -1, we need to do for let I equal 0, I less, I'm sorry, I greater than num of positions, I minus minus. All right, and then we're going to do let last name equal r of names dot shift, because this time when we get the -1, right? So we're going from Kyle and we're going to take him off the front, and we're going to add him to the back of the line, right? And so we're going to do last name as a shift, and then to add it to the end, we're going to do r of names. And I just figured out why my test was failing. Can anyone else figure out why my test wasn't doing anything? And don't worry if you can't, because it took me this long for it to pop into my head. Right? How many parameters do we have to solve this challenge? 2. How
Parameters.
many parameters am I putting in over here?
1.
Just one.
1,
Oh.
right? So basically I wasn't telling it to do anything, which is why I kept doing that. And so for this, I would want to feed in a 2 right there, right? And so let me just comment this out real quick. And knowing my luck, it still won't work, but I really hope this fixes it. Yeah, there it is. My test passed, right? And so what I would do then, before even writing like this if statement and duplicating it, is I would do something like this, that basically would be if given a negative number, it removes names from the front and adds to the end of the array. Right, we've got the Kyle thing over here, and so basically we can delete this. Oops, here and here, and then we'll take Kyle off the front and add him to the end. And then let's change this to -1. And this test will probably pass because I've already solved it, right? But let's go ahead and do yarn test. Right, so I've got one test suite, so I've got the one file here, and all 3 of my tests are now passed. Right, and so the next thing we like, this would be like the three tests, right? Like these are the three outcomes that we do. A positive number, like if nothing happens, which to make sure that we're doing the right thing there, right? We put a 0 in there. Let's run that. All three of the tests still pass, right? And so now I've basically iterated through this, written my test, I've then gone and written the code to make it pass, and then worked my way through a solution. And this would be more indicative of a real life workflow on how we aspire to write software. Being very honest with you, like most software developers will aspire to write test driven development. It's not always as easy as it seems, especially if you don't understand the full scope of the problem that you're trying to solve. Very often in my day-to-day work, I will write my code first and then go back and figure out how to test it, versus being like being able to just whip out a bunch of tests and then write the code that fits into it. All right, this would be the back of the line solution. Any questions on anything I just did to solve this?
Somebody put another solution in
I'm
the
sorry,
chat.
Nika, you're coming through really quiet.
Somebody put another solution in the chat. Could you look at that?
In the chat, yes, 1 second here. In the Slack chat or in the Zoom chat?
Not in the Zoom chat.
So instead of two separate conditions, I believe this works, let I equal 0. So the only thing I have with that is, if we do that, are we still taking them off in the right direction?
I passed both the test cases, so with the negative as well. So I think so. That's why I use believe. I'm not 100%.
So the negative number isn't, so we still need to be able to determine if we need to pop and unshift or shift and push. So I'm not sure how that would solve that, right? Because if num position is greater than here, let me pull this over here real quick.
I might not have copied the whole thing. Let me make sure I grab it all. All right, try that one.
This out. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this one real quick. So we've got back of the line, for let I equals 0. So we've got our for loop. So I is instantiated at 0. And then I is less than the absolute of num position. So it doesn't matter if you get a negative or a positive number, we're going to turn it to a positive number. And then we're going to be counting up to that number. All right, so if num positions is greater than 0, do this. And so let's take a look. Right, so we're failing 2 of the tests here. And so if given a positive number, removes from the end and adds to the front. Right, so it only did it one time. And it looks like you got Greg, but not Kenesha. And then if gives 0, nothing changes. So we don't return anything. That is because you only have your returns here. So your return, because it's inside the if statement, the first time you loop through, right? So I is equal to 0, we loop through, you're always going to, so I is going to be 0, I is going to be less than this. We are going to come in here. This is always going to be false the first time, right? Because, or I'm sorry, num positions, this is always going to be true the first time. I apologize because we've turned, well, actually it's not. So let's see here. If num positions, because we're not at the absolute value of it, and this doesn't change it. This is just a reading of it. So is if num positions is greater than 0. So if you were given a positive number, you would come in here, right? And we'll say, pop it off the end and then unshift it to the front, right? Which is correct. And where you're running into a problem is because your return is inside your for loop. You will return the first time you run your loop and you will never run it again. So this would possibly work. Let's try this. No, we're still failing here. And so if 0, nothing changes. Oh, I'm still inside the for loop. Sorry about that. That's my fault. Let's fix this. Where are we getting screwed up here? I think right here. That, and this, and then this, and then this. All right. There you go. So that would work. Right. So you can do, but to me, this is more confusing. Like, one, because you're running it off the absolute value here, but you're not changing it permanently. So this means something different than this, right? So this is a valid solution, but, and like technically you're only writing one loop instead of 2 different loops, depending on if you get a positive number or not. But for me, this one was harder to figure out. But again, would be like, if this was like an application problem, like you wouldn't be docked any points for it or anything like that. Like that's still a perfectly valid solution. All right, cool. So that is that one. It's 7:27. So let's go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break here. And then we'll break out into the, or we'll pick the next challenge and break out into the next challenge. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. We are going to hit the employee data challenge, which is kind of the, I would say like the capstone for the course here. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this. We'll show the code. And we're going to walk through this as a class. So I'll try and ask questions where I can, and just so we keep it moving, because this one is a fairly difficult one. All right, so let me go ahead and grab the instructions. Put those over here. Whoops, I'm not in my own. So let's go ahead and say code. Employee data.js. All right, and we can shut these down and drop that in there. Oops. Let's do this first. And my screen's big enough for everyone to read, hopefully. If anyone can't,
Yes.
just let me
Yeah.
know. All right. And let's do that. Let's grab prep here. And let's grab this. And then let's grab this. All right, so this one, just to not going to do as a TDD, I'm just going to walk through this, and that way we can keep everything open here on one screen. All right, so you're a new programmer at your company. Your CFO needs some data regarding all of the employees. Your CFO needs to know the number of employees per job title, the average salary for that job title within the company, the average bonus that job title receives with the company, and then the average total compensation for that job title. You're given an array of objects that represents all of the employees in the company. You need to parse through all of the employee data and return an array of objects that represents each job title and the corresponding compensation data, including title, total employees, average salary, average bonus, and average total comp. All right. So this is our input, right? So can anyone tell me like how these objects are oriented, like how they're organized? Like just by looking at it, plain English, like nothing mathematical. Like if you were to look at this, what's the one thing that's different for each of them?
The value pair of each object within the array.
So yes, but what I'm looking for is the name, right? All of this stuff belongs to Joe, right? So each one of these objects in the array belongs to that person, right? So like if we were looking at this is basically like a list of employees, what their title is, and then what their salary and bonus is at the individual level, right? And so we're going to get an array of objects that represent each individual, oh, I just spelled that wrong, individual at the company. It will contain their name, title, salary, and bonus. All right, so this is an array, right? We've got that square bracket there for employee data, and it's an array of objects. Each element in the array is an object, and then that each object basically represents an employee, what their job title is, what their base salary is, and what their bonus is. Okay. Now the CFO needs the number of employees per job title, the average salary for that job title within the company, and then the average bonus for that job title receives within the company, and then the average total compensation, which is bonus plus salary. So if this is basically kind of organized as by employee, if we look down here at what the output should look like, how are these organized? Right, by the title, right? So this is information pertaining to the developer title, right? So there are three employees that are developers at the company. Their average salary is this, their average bonus is this, their average total comp is this, right? And then we have a product manager, and then we have a designer, right? 2 and 2, and then all of their pay stats for each title or each role, right? But notice the final output is still an array of objects. Okay, so this is very, very common. This is kind of like the bread and butter of what developers do, is we take information that's formatted in one way, and we figure out how we can present it in a required and hopefully useful way for one of our clients. And at this point, our client is an internal client, it's our CFO, right? So I need to return an array of objects that represents each title at the company. It will contain title, average salary, average bonus, average total comp, right? And so in examples, we'll say Steve below. All right, so I need to parse through this information and basically figure out what I need to keep and what I need to get rid of. Okay, so I need to build something that will hold information that pertains to, and I'm sorry, I also need employee count in here, right? That basically I need to save that's relevant for my final output. And so if I have a object for Joe, who is a developer, and I have an object for Kelly, who is a developer, and I have an object for Amber, who is a developer, this title is the common theme, right? Like this is the one thing that's the same in all three of these. So, and notice I don't need a list of names of the employees, so I can discard the names. I'm going to keep the title. I'm going to keep the salary. I'm going to keep the bonus. And then I'm also going to start recording instances of people with that title or my total employee count. All right, so okay. So can anyone think of a data structure that we could use to save all of this information? Sorry, Frank, you're coming through a little choppy.
Um,
No, sorry, it's still, I think you've got something going on with your microphone.
can you hear me now?
Yep.
I was thinking that you could save all that information in a new object, but individually for each bit of data, you could push it to another array named for like, developer salary, developer bonus, developer compensation, total comp for like each of those values.
Right, so we could do something like this, right, where we have dev, and then we could do an array that has salary, bonus, total comp, and count, right? And then we could do the same things for PM, right? Is this what you were thinking?
Yes.
Okay. So, right, this would be how I would tackle this. All right. There is a way to tackle this with 100% with built-ins, but it's horrible. So I want to tell a story with my code. So this is probably what I would do. All right. So let's go about building this. All right. So let's go ahead and say console.log R of employees. And let's go ahead. Actually, let's do console.log get employee data, and then we can actually just return R of employees. All right, so node. Oops, gotta save it. All right, so we're up and running. There's my employee data, right? So everything's getting fed in. There's all of my stuff. Now I need, because I have an array, I'm going to need to loop through here, right? And I'm also going to need my temporary object, right? So let's go, we'll say let, we'll just call it job data equal an empty, I'm sorry, an empty object. And so then we're going to do for. We'll call it employee in employee R, or sorry, for R of employees. All right, and then let's just go ahead and console.log R of employees. And now we're not worried about returning this, we're worried about returning job data for right now. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. And you're yelling at me because it's not for, it's for of. And there we go. So actually, run that again. All right, so now notice that, so there's my return statement there, that's it. But I'm getting all of this data. Oops, I'm doing this over and over again. Sorry, I want to do employee. That's my fault. I was wondering where all that was coming from. There we go. So now notice I'm not in an array anymore, and I'm just spitting out each one of these things here, right? And so if I want to create a key value pair, can anyone walk me through creating like my first key value pair? Right? So all I need to do is either using dot notation or using bracket notation is just do my object name and then give it the key name and then assign it a value. All right. So if I wanted to do something like this, right? So we'll get rid of this console.log and we could say job data. And we'll call it, and just to avoid additional brackets inside brackets, I'll do dot notation and we'll do it by title. And we'll just throw the number 1 in here, right? Let's see what we get when we do this. Right, so there's my developer, my product manager, and my designer right there, right? And product manager has a space in it. So notice how, remember, all of these get converted to strings in the back end, but this one has the quotes around it because there's the space in there. If I were to take the space out of there, it would look like that as well. But this is neither here nor there. This doesn't impact what my object is doing. All right, that's just a eccentricity of JavaScript. All right, so now instead of it just being the number one, we talked about wanting to make this an array, right? And so if I do this, I'll just get an empty array for each of them. And so I need the title, which is right here. That's going to be my key. I need my employee count, which, so I'm just going to put the number 1 there. And then I need their average salary. So I'm going to do employee dot salary. And then I need their bonus, which is going to be employee dot bonus. And then I need their total comp, right? Which is going to be this. All right, and so now if I run this, right, there's my count, there's this, and this. And now what the problem is like if we look at designer, right? So here's a designer and here's a designer. I've got a salary of 87,000 and a salary of 77,500. I'm just overwriting what's going on in here. Remember, because keys have to be unique. So if my key, so basically I need to make a decision here, right? And if the title has never been discovered before in my loop, I need to do this, right? I need to add this in here as the first employee. However, if the title has already been created as a key, instead of overwriting it, I need to add the stats for the next employee cumulatively. So that's telling me I need a what here?
Add it cumulatively. Are you talking about doing a count with a loop?
So, well, I'm already looping.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But I need to make a decision. And what building block do I need to use if I need to make a decision?
Yeah.
Yep, an if statement, right? And so if I say if, and I am checking to see if this key already exists inside my object, what built-in method could I use to do that? Right, so what job data dot what?
Are you looking at like includes?
I don't know if an array has dot includes, but I think the object version of that I'm looking for would be a little bit different.
Index of.
Nope, that's an array again. Objects don't have an index, but we're getting closer.
Object.keys.
That will tell me all of the keys.
Has own property.
There we go, right? Or we can use in or dot has own property and then the name of the key. Right? And so my if statement will be has own. Oh, sorry. And this actually will be inside of my for loop, has own property. And then we're going to, again, say employee dot title. Okay, because that is employee dot title is going to be designer, product manager, or developer. And if it already has that key, then we need to do something a little bit different, right? And so if it already has that key, we need to actually access the array and start modifying these values inside the array. All right, and so does anyone want to take a stab at how, because we would only get into here if this has already been created, right? So how would I access the value of this key as an array index? Does anyone want to take a stab at that? And if not, no worries. Like I said, this is why I always offer to walk this one through. Nika, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just, maybe you said it and I just missed it. What's the difference between has own and has own property?
Bum, bum, bum. MVM object. So we've got has own. Static method that returns true if the specified object has the indicated property as its own property. Is inherited, does not exist. The method return. So this has to deal with inheritance. And so I have never used has own before, and it may work the same as we need it for this. Specified property is a direct property of the object. Even if the property value is null or undefined, the method returns false if inherited. So we have not talked about the concept of inheritance yet. And that is something that will be with object-oriented programming. And that's something where like we start dealing with classes. And so if I have a class that is, say, animal, and like I give that class a property like is alive, true or false. So is it alive or is it dead? And then I create a dog class that is an extension of the animal class, and then give it a property like is barking. When you create a new dog class, and again, like this is, I can't go any higher with the terminology here. You would be able to look at the properties that the dog has directly, but you would also have properties like is alive that it inherits from the animal class. And that we're starting to get pretty deep into like introductory object-oriented programming. But I, in this instance, would use has own property.
Okay. Is it almost like parent and child relationship?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's the parent class and the child class. But with this, I would like I would not use has owned for that.
Okay.
Mainly because we're not using classes and we're not dealing with an inheritance, and it's a more specific version. I would stick to has own property.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And all right, so to basically get in here, we need to do job data, employee title, right? And then box 0, right? And so that is the employee count. So if we do that, so if we run this again now, we'll see if we hit it correctly. And I did. Notice how these stayed pretty much the same. But I updated these, right? And again, this is one of those things where with an object, there's no index value, there's no guarantee which one's going to be the last one pulled out of there and which one's going to be the one that's overwritten. But it doesn't matter because it's not the right answer anyways. And so now I need to do the same thing for here. And this time we're going to use index 1, right? So if we come down here and we make a note, right, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, and or sorry, this is all 3. This is the fourth item in our array. right? So for this, now we need to do plus equals employee dot salary, right? And let's run this again. All right, so now we're getting cumulative totals here. Right, and we'll do the same thing down here. 2, and this is the bonus. Let's run it again. Right, so now we've got the cumulative bonuses. And now lastly, and so now we've got 382 plus 39,000. All right, so that gives us 421,000. So those numbers are adding up now. All right, Nika, question again?
Yeah, sorry. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So we did the employee of array of employees, and we're doing that as the loop. So it does the exact same thing on every part of the previous, well, every part for the array that we're creating. So basically, with you drilling down employee dot title 0 and doing a count for each one of them, we're building the array with the counts, right? Did I say that right? Trying to make sure I understand.
Well, so let me say it back to you to make sure we're talking about the same thing, right? So we have a for loop up here, a for of loop, right? So every employee, which is the element in array of employees, right? Because each object is an element, right? So like if I were to do console.log employee data index 0, right, it would just return this object.
Yeah.
And so I'm going through each object in this array. All right. And I am saying if there's already a key value pair that matches a title of the current employee that I'm looking at, we're going to increment. But the first time through, right? So the first time we increment through, we hit developer. Developer does not exist inside of my job data. It is an empty object, right? And so I'm coming down to the else case and I'm saying create a key for job data that is the employee. So this object dot title, right? And so I'm creating a key the first time through that says developer.
Right, because it's not in the previous array of objects.
Yeah, and then I'm giving myself an initial count of 1. I'm recording the employee salary, their bonus, and then their total compensation.
And you
And
wouldn't do an initial count of 0 because it wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't have 0 of those employees. It would have to be at least 1.
right. Yep.
Okay.
And then the second time through, so the second time I iterate through, I grab this object. This time the developer key already exists, right? And so the job data object has a key in here now that is developer, and then an array of 1, and then sal, bonus, total comp, right?
Because the first time you went through,
That's
you
after the
went
first
through
time.
the if and went to else and created it.
Yep.
When it goes back through, it sees it.
Yep. So now the second time through, it says, okay, it does have the key of developer. So this is now true. Come in here. And so I'm going into job data. I'm then,
Okay, and then you count. Okay, I have another one.
well, hold
So that
on.
would be, oh,
Hold
sorry.
on, because you're skipping a step. So you're going into job data, you're locating this key, and then you're going into the value of it, which is an array, and then you're grabbing the first index or the 0 index position, the first item, and now I'm cumulatively adding to it. right? And so find the object, find the key, and now I'm manipulating the value, right? That's what these are. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then I'm cumulatively adding to each of them. And then I will iterate through a third time and I get a product manager, right? So now I'm back in my else statement, and now I'm building out my product manager key value pair with the title is the key and then the array of their info, right? And then the third time through, I'm back to developer. So I hit my true case and I increment all my stats again. Designer is going to be false. So I then build out my initial designer key. Now product manager is true again. So now I'm going to increment all of their info, and then designer is true. I increment all of their info. And then at the end of the day, I have 3 developers, 2 product managers, and 2 designers. And I have the cumulative amount of all of their pay stats, right? Because I know I need the averages, but that's what I can use the count for, right? So I can divide 382 by 3 and find out what the average salary is in my next step. The same thing for bonus and total comp.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. And feel free to ask all the questions that you want. So, all right. So I am now done with the first part of this, right? And so I have parsed all of the data that I need to save here. And now I need to build an array of objects that represent this data that I just parsed. All right, so now I'm going to say, we'll just say let results equal an array, right? We're just going to call it an empty array because I need to return an array. And then I'm going to build out my second part down here. And so I have right now an object with 3 keys in it, right? 3 keys with a bunch of values that I need. So I know that I'm now going to need to loop through here and build out my objects that I need to build these objects out individually and then move them into my array. All right. So now I can say for, we'll call it job in job data. Right. And so now let's go ahead and console.log job and let's take a look at what that looks like. Right. So I get developer, product manager, so on, so all the way down. Right. And that's not necessarily what I'm looking for. So I need to access the value and not just the key. So let's go ahead and, oops, sorry, I'm also writing this for loop inside of that for loop, and that is bad. That's why I saw it so many times. So if we do this, now I should only see 3 of them. There we go. There's me looping through job and job data and console.logging. And so now I can say job data dot job. Oops, job data. How about this? There we go. And so now we have all of the info that we need. And same thing, right? So I can say 0. And those are my total employee counts, so on and so forth down the line. Now I need to actually create my object. So we'll say let temp object, right? Because I only need this as I construct things through my loop. So we'll say I need the first one is title, and that is just going to be job. Now let's go ahead and instead of that, and then we'll say we're in the for loop, we can say results dot push temp object, and let's see what we get there. And then we're going to, instead of returning job data, now we can actually return results. Right, and so now I've got an array with objects in it, and the only thing I have is my title. So let's go ahead and start building the rest of these out. So we can say total employees, right? And that is going to be this, right? So let's go and take a look, right? So there's my total employees is 3. And we can just keep going down the line here, right? So now I need average salary. And need a comma up here. And then I can say job, no, we'll say job data 1 divided by that, right? And so now we're taking our salary, like our total cumulative salary, and dividing it by the average number of employees, right? So 101, 82, 250, 127. We've got some trailing numbers here. We can clean those up here in a second. All right. Actually, might as well just clean it up now. So let's go ahead and now, because the actual solution, there's nothing there. I don't need to do a to fixed here. I can just do a parse int. Right, and I don't have to convert things back and forth or control how many index values I have. I'm just going to cut it off. All right, so 127, 333, 101, 82, 250, 127, 333, 101, and 82, 250. All right, so we're looking good there. So now I'm just going to take this whole thing and let's bring it down here. And we can call this average bonus. And instead of it being 1, we can go to 2 and get this, right? So that's our bonus. So here we go. That's looking good. And one more time, we can say, what do they want to call this? Average total comp with a typo, of course. So average total comp. And then we can say 3 here and grab that last one. And there we go. Right. And now, if we were taking a look at this, right? So developer 3, 127, 13, 140, 333. So that looks good to me. This one looks good to me. And that one looks good to me. So any questions on how I constructed the second half of this? Go for it, Nika.
Okay, I was able to follow everything that you were doing on the second for, but just to make sure I'm understanding, because you're using the for in the job, I mean, you could call that anything, and that's just you saying for each, I guess I would say item or element in job data.
Each key value pair in
Key
job
value pair,
data.
sorry.
Yep.
That's the better way to say it. Okay.
Yep. So each job is going to represent this. Right. So if we scroll up here, where before I did it, right? So when I'm looping through, sorry, up here even further, right? So this is what job looks like each time, right? It's key with, and it actually, it just looks like the value. That's how I'm accessing it. And but notice how like I just put job here, like that's the key. Right. And then here I've got to do the object with the key to get to the value.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And if we weren't storing the information in an array, like I wouldn't need any of these. Like if these were all just like single value strings, like I wouldn't need that those extra index values on that. All right. So that is like the toughest one on the list. And we're through it. And again, I will take this and copy and paste it into a replit and upload it with everything else at the end of the night tonight. Any other questions in here? Any other things anyone would like me to like stick notes on or anything like that? Okay, so this one, and again, when we solve this, right, like if we look at this all together, we're using an object data structure that is also then having a nested array as a value. We're doing a for loop. We're doing some control flow. We're manipulating the array values inside of the object. We're creating a key value pair with the key basically coming from the title of another object, or like a key from another object, and then also creating an array, right? And then down here, we're doing another for loop. And these could have been just standard for loops instead of for of, for in, but with that, you end up with another bracket in here for I, so it gets even harder to read. And we're creating an object, and then we're adding it to our array, and then we're returning our final array of objects, right? So all together, and like I said, this is the most challenging problem in the list. We just used all of the building blocks that we've talked about for the last 3 weeks to solve one problem. But like if with anything like this, and again, this is on par with like the first couple of problems in the application, and then the application starts to get harder from here. And it's very easy to lose your way and start flailing around. So what I stress, and kind of like how I've been trying to teach this class, is we want to get one thing working, right? So the first thing I did was figure out how to make a key value pair and iterate through my sample data, right? And add that in. Then once I solved that, I said, okay, I need to be able to make one of two decisions here: either add a new employee title or modify an existing employee title. So I need some control flow. So I created my if statement, right? And before I worried about any part of creating this stuff down here, I made sure that I could get the info that I needed in an organized manner, right? And then you can see constantly running my code, looking at what I've got going on, making small mistakes, correcting them until I get to where I think I need to be. And then I'm ready to take the next step. And then I sit there and think about, okay, well, I know that I need an array of objects, so I know that I'm going to need another loop to loop through the key value pairs that I've created. And I want to modify those into objects that look like this and mine that data out of there, and then push it into my final results array, and then return the results, right? So if you look at this as one big problem, it's very easy to get lost. But if we write down what we like, how we want to tackle this, what we want to do, and then continue to move through it one step at a time, it becomes a little bit easier to tackle. And if you make sure that you've got the last part that you were looking for working the way you want it to, if things go wrong, you don't have to get frustrated and delete all of your code and go all the way back to the beginning. You can kind of just go back to where your save point was, right? And on some of these problems that are more complicated, you'll end up writing a lot more code than just this, all right, for some of the application problems. All right, So with that is 8:20. So let's go ahead and find one last challenge here. Oops, sorry. Okay, write a function that takes in a string of lowercase characters and returns an object containing the count for each letter in the string. All right, so we're going to do this one. So let's go ahead and drop that. All right, so let's go ahead and work through this. I'm sorry, I need to fork it. Right, and grab the README here. All right, so we're taking in one parameter, which is a string of letters. All right, we need to return an object with keys of the unique letters in the string and values of how many times that letter occurred. All right, so say key value. All right, example, see below. All right, so we need to iterate through our string and identify if letter has been identified. As we will need to, I should say, if it hasn't, we'll need to create a key for the letter and note the occurrence. If it has, we need to find the key and increment the value. All right, and then at the end, return object. Bonus points for making it in alphabetical order. All right. So this has a similar element to the last one that we just worked on. So it is 8:23. I'm going to give everyone until about 8:45-ish, 8:46-ish on this one. All right, everyone, 8:47 p.m. Central Time. We are back from the number of characters challenge. We've got about 13 minutes. So I'm going to hop in here and go through the solution. We're still going to do this step by step. So we'll say, let's go ahead and start off with our string here. All right, just str. And let's go down here and do node number of characters. All right, and there's our string. Now, oh, sorry, 1 second here. I have a, or we know that we need to return an object, right? So we can say let results equal an object. And same thing, we can now do, start creating key value pairs for our object, right? The key is going to be the letter. So we could do, we could say, let's go ahead and just to make things easy, I'm going to do let R equal string dot split. And we'll split it on every character. Let's go ahead and do R. Now let's see what we've got here. Okay, there's our array of characters. And we'll do for letter in R or of R. And now let's go ahead and console.log letter. Right, there's each of our individual letters. All right, so now I can do letter and results, right, equals 1. All right, and so now let's go ahead and return results. Let's take this, do console.log, right? And now we've got all of the letters that we have in here. So we could add a bunch more letters in here. Oh, sorry. I don't want to add special characters, right? And so we get more letters, but we're still stuck at 1 here. Right, so just like we did in the employee data one, I need to start making a decision here. Right, so I can say if results dot has own property, oops, has own property letter, we're going to do something else. We're going to do this. All right, and so now, just like before, we're going to say results letter plus equals 1. And so now we've got our actual counts. And then if we wanted to do, let's see here, if sort just off the basis, we'll do it. And then we're in alphabetical order. Any questions on how I solved this one? Right, so this is, if we do this side by side, right, this one was more complex, but we still had that same if statement saying if the job data object has a key of the title, right, then increment that key or increment the value for that key. If not, create the key with the initial value. We're doing the same thing here. Right, so if the key, which is just a single letter this time, is present, increment the value by 1. If not, create the key and assign an initial value of 1. Right, so these two things are doing the exact same thing. This is just a smaller part of it. And we throw the dot sort in there from the beginning, and we're just adding the keys in the order that we had them, even though there's no guaranteed value that the keys would actually, or the objects do not have a guaranteed order, but we'll pretty much see it that way. All right. Any questions for me on this? Okay. Any questions for me on the past 3 weeks? Anything at all that you want to ask about? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.